Your first mistake is buying shit from Shein. That's not cottagecore, it's wearing a cottagecore costume.
Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and today's video has been requested by you and is going to be about capitalism and witchcraft, specifically consumerism and aesthetics such as cottagecore and indeed witchcore. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there, you can do a monthly donation, a one-off donation, or even buy a tarot reading with me, Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And if you'd like to support me there, thank you so very much. This is the timeline of this video. Be aware right away from the start, this is going to be mostly a video essay rather than one of the videos that you've seen here before. The kind of research that required makes it a video essay, but it's different from those because it's not scripted, it just has points. Let the gods help me. We're gonna look into an historical timeline first, from capitalism to consumerism to neoliberalism to the current cultural and economic society that we are in. After we've looked into a timeline of the history, we're going to look into PR and influencers and the entire concept of marketing to sell us things within consumerism. And then we're going to see how all of these applies to the concept and aesthetic of cottagecore and witchcore, how beauty plays into our needs and desires. So we're going to look into form and function, and we're going to see how this all applies, and it started off from a post that I saw on Reddit a few months ago and started to get my gears clicking, because it was someone that, as you've heard from the quote before, simply asked on the subreddit for cottagecore, how do you think that these items of clothing would go with each other? Would they deliver cottagecore? Unfortunately for them, those screenshots were from Shein, and people ate them alive for that, without understanding the background from which somebody like that might come from, how the implicit classism was present in their comments. And so since then I've been thinking we need to discuss and deconstruct this. So here's what we're going to do. First things first, the capitalism that we're talking about here is the economic and cultural system that we're currently living in, which for easiness we will consider from the Industrial Revolution, so late 1700s, beginning of the 1800s onwards. Arguably the history of capitalism goes further back to merchants, to medieval times. There are videos for that, I'll link them down in the description below. The concept of capitalism in the Industrial Revolution was somebody has capital to invest into a warehouse, into machinery to make a product, something that people need. That was important at the time, something that people need. That is the capitalist. They invest the capital. They have this money to invest. From inheritance, from any kind of thing, they have surplus money to invest. On the other side of capitalism are the laborers. They don't have this capital to invest. Their value is their labor. So they get money in exchange for their labor. In this, the point of capitalism is to make profit. So the capitalist invests the money in the machinery, pays the laborer. The point is to make a product that they can sell for more than the money that they invested. Arguably, the profit of capitalism comes from unpaid labor, because if the labor of a person working in a factory allows for a piece of wood worth $1 to be sold as a chair for $30, the $29 really are the value added by the person that worked on it. But the person is actually just paid $10. That difference between what they actually sell the item for and what the person is paid is stolen wages. That's at least the vision of Marx and socialism. We're not going to go into that here, but to give you an idea. The step that moved capitalism from producing goods that were needed, so clothing, food, to producing goods for profit and therefore make people need or want stuff at that point beyond their basic needs was, interestingly, World War I. World War I was the reason for a lot of factories and a lot of things to be manufactured for the warfare effort. When World War I ended, those factories were still there. At that point then, they were converted into factories to mass produce goods to a much wider and larger degree than they were before. So at that point, when you are producing more things than people need, what are you going to do to sell it to them? We need a new ideology of life, something to sell as an idea more than goods, that people will want, therefore, the goods to embody that idea. That is literally the beginning of consumerism. And that's how we got the Roaring Twenties in reality. That's what actually spurred that. PR started to be applied to the idea of things that can be precipitated in a product that you can buy that sells you a lifestyle more than food to feed yourself or a car to drive around. At that point, a car was the exemplification of a lifestyle, or PR and marketing needed to sell it to you as a representation, a status symbol of life, rather than just something that gets you from A to B. Bernays is the little son of a bitch that we will talk about more in detail about how that happened. This goes on well and happy, and we get so consumerist and we make so much stuff that people buy because we made them believe that they need it, until the financial crash of 29. The financial crash of 29 showed the fallacies of capitalism. My argument there is that the stock market shouldn't exist because it started to make virtual goods from stuff that before you could tangibly buy. The stock market is the evolution of merchants and companies signing notes saying, I will pay with this much interest. But in the state that it was in 29 and the state that it is today, especially with margins and stuff, we are trading on stuff that doesn't exist. It's so wrong. But that's not the topic of this video. The point is, the crash comes. Capitalism is fallible because it can have these crashes that send people into homelessness. People can't buy food, let alone consumer stuff. And this state of disarray and disappointment of most people because of the crash of 29 is what supported the rise of fascism in Europe. Fascism was already present in Italy since the early 20s, but with this kind of reduction of quality of life that went to all people because all this money was lost in the stock market because it was gambled. That's what happens in the stock market, gamble. Anyway, because of that, in those crisis moments, fascism becomes really alluring because it promises you that if you trade your freedom to structure, and structure is based on something that we know, which means the past, and it becomes very tribal, so us versus them, so I'm going to protect you, which usually means white, cis, het, man, and all of that kind of stuff. That is why fascism becomes alluring in times of crisis, and that's how we got to World War II. We don't need to go into the details of how devastating World War II was. The consequence of that, though, once Germany was defeated, though, is that a lot of other countries were also very heavily impacted economically because wars are an insane cost. From the US, a lot of economical measures and programs were put in place, not only to start rebuild, but to also put in fail-safes into capitalism. That is Keynesian economy, basically. Keynesian economics is a body of ideas set forth by John Maynard Keynes in his General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, 1935-36, and other works, intended to provide a theoretical basis for government full employment policies. It was the dominant school of macroeconomics and represented the prevailing approach to economic policy amongst most Western governments until the 1970s. He also maintained that deliberate government action could foster full employment. Keynesian economists claim that the government can directly influence the demand for goods and services by altering tax policies and public expenditures. Which means, in very short and simplified, that there's capitalism, there's the invisible hand of market that lets demand and supply manage each other, without ever mentioning that marketing creates unreal needs and wants. It's not that invisible, is it? The hand. Keynesian economy basically puts in fail-safes in the kind of control that the government can have on basic supply for needs. So a lot of things gets nationalized, like electricity, coal here in the UK, all those basic needs that allow people to live a dignified life, basically. The fail-safes on capitalism were also implemented with Keynesian economy exactly to avoid people falling on hard times, because when people fall onto hard times, they are much easier to radicalize. So all these economies were also there to basically avoid World War II happening again. See where we are now. Which is the reason why 50s to the 70s there was an insane economical boom that had repercussions across the world, at least the Western world. There was this sort of guarantee for a foundation that people would have, which actually gave way to the belief of the fallacy of hard work. See, if you work hard, you get to buy your house, buy your car, live in suburbia, and live the American dream, the white fence. At the time, it was possible, not because of free market and capitalism, but because of the Keynesian fail-safes that would guarantee for people to be safe on a quite higher level than we are definitely used to now. Unfortunately, coming to the 70s and the presidency of Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher here in the UK, we started to move to neoliberalism. Point of neoliberalism: if you're thinking of liberalism as something progressive and on the left, you are falling for the false friend of the word that it sounds. Liberalism in this sense is used in the way that it was used in the 17 and 1800s, where basically it is for people who have money to be free to decide how to move it and invest it, which technically on a practical level just means I don't want to pay taxes, I just want to make more money. How do I do that? That's neoliberalism for you. It's taking down all the regulations that come from the government that under Keynesian economics allowed people to be safe, because when you were earning over a certain amount of richness, there were tax brackets that meant that over a certain amount, 85%, 90% of what you earned was to be going into taxes. Something that also people don't understand about tax brackets is that, how do I explain this? If you're making $1 million and the tax bracket says that over $500,000 you pay 95% as tax, which if it was the case, you people in America would have decent human healthcare. That's not the case, unfortunately. I'm sorry. The point there is, up until your 500,000, you pay whatever tax is necessary. Let's say that it's 0% actually up until 500,000. The 95% you pay just on the money that you earn over that. So you earn 600,000 instead of 500,000. On that 100,000 between 500 and 600,000, that is where you pay the 95%. So actually, of that 100,000, you actually just get 5K. But you already have 500,000 and nobody touches. That was the issue with tax brackets. When people earned so much money, so much profit, beyond their need anyway, other than to just hoard, that extra money was taxed so that it could pay for the national guarantee of things, so that it could pay for welfare, so that it could pay for electricity, so that it could pay for gas, so that it could pay for all those things that were nationalized. America went to the moon with the taxes paid to foster progress that way. It's an equalizer of society. It's not quite socialism, but because it guarantees that level of dignity, it means that whoever can pay more, because they have enough money anyway, guarantees that the people that don't even make that can still access those basic dignity needs.
Okay. How about this? No more billionaires. None. After you reach 999 million, every red cent goes to schools and healthcare. You get a trophy that says, I won capitalism, and we name a dog park after you.
The point of running utilities like gas and electricity nationalized and not for profit was exactly because of that. The tariffs are low enough that the lowest in society could pay them without having their dignity of life affected, without having to choose between heating or food, which is something that in the UK, unfortunately, we have to do nowadays. But what neoliberalism allowed, and that's why it was sold so much by the right of Thatcher and the right of Reagan, was that big corporations could finally be very heavily deregulated. Anything that you think will drive you towards profit, you pretty much can do. So the entire idea of supply and demand, the invisible hand of the market, capitalism is where we naturally would go to anyway, that is such bullshit. Because at that point, corporations are not making products that meet a need. That is not their primary reason. So they are not incentivized to make a good product that satisfies a need or a want for the consumer. No, at that point, the only priority is profit. So is how much more value can I extract from this item that cost me $1 if I sell it for 30. That is the entire point, bringing profits to then give to the shareholders, which own the company. So very different from the little merchant that goes around, takes a loan, pays it back with interest. The fact that they are both called capitalism, a bit of a misnomer there. On the point of making profits and extracting more value, we get around the 80s and 90s. So what the US and the UK did under Reagan and Thatcher was moving from being manufacturers, so they build and made things. Think about, I want to say, Ford in Detroit.
Detroit underwent a rapid process of industrialization in the early part of the 20th century, which led to enormous prosperity and wealth being generated, which was by and large shared by the majority of the city's population. A downward spiral, though, came from the 1970s as American manufacturers faced increasing competition from abroad and moved production to cheaper locations to cut costs, leaving unemployment in their wake. To emphasize how this affected the inequality in Detroit, to this day, in Livingston County, which is 96% white, the median household income is $73,000. In Detroit City, which is 82.7% African American, the median household income is $26,000, and nearly 40% of people live in poverty.
And here in the UK, we had the steel manufacturing companies, the coal, all those things that are tangible. We move from manufacturing to the financial services because with everything deregulated, you can start playing and gambling in the stock market with things that don't exist. The manufacturing industry here in the UK was destroyed and decimated. The poverty that we have, especially in the north of England, it's due to that. That's what happened. The miners' strikers of '84 were exactly that. It's not that people didn't need the coal. It was an aware decision from the Thatcher government of there's going to be more money in the financial services. Let's focus on that and let's denationalize and close down the mines, basically. Which is very ironic because 1800s, capitalism starts with products that are needed and now we can make in huge numbers because of factories. And then we get into consumerism after World War I, and the entire point is to manufacture the need for something that actually people don't need. And then we move to financial services. We literally move from making things that are indeed needed, from just speculating over digital numbers, because we have created something so insane like the stock market that just exists virtually, that there's more money in it, so that's what's worth it, beyond the actual need for food that people have. The cost of living crisis here in the UK, because our farmers do not get enough money, do not get incentivized at all. They actually run at a loss. Before, when we were in Europe, they are subsidies from Europe to still maintain the agriculture that we had. Nowadays, we mostly depend on the imports from Europe because they still have the subsidies. After Brexit, we don't. And so, as much as we need our own food, we can't make it because all the money and investment are in finance. Farmers have no reason to not even waste, lose money on their farms, despite the fact that we need the food. And the food that we have to import from Europe now is more expensive. I shiver anytime that I need to do a grocery shopping that is not from Lidl, because I see the difference. And again, people have to choose between, do I keep the eating on or do I eat today? When we lose manufacturing, as you can guess, stuff still needs to be done. The point with food and Europe. In the 90s and noughties, once the UK and US gave up their manufacturing because now there's more money in virtual money, which is financial services, somebody needed to pick up the slack. And that somebody was Asia, very specifically China.
The complete irony of the current situation is that the system was designed for Shein to do this. Corporations have been destroying the competition of small business by outsourcing manufacturing to countries with cheap labor, allowing them to undercut prices and maximize profits, replacing opportunities for skilled laborers to make a real living with low-paid, unskilled service or warehouse jobs. All Shein is doing is cutting out the middleman. Instead of selling their goods to big brands for them to mark up the price and make more profits, they're selling them directly to the customers and making the profits themselves. This is what companies are supposed to do under capitalism.
And this gives you an idea of the timeline to get to now. But Isha, what does all of this have to do with the fact that I like my cottagecore aesthetic, and if I get an apron dress, joy, I feel like I have my farm? Good point. Let's get into that. Let's get into marketing and PR. And today, influencers.
Conspicuous consumption, also known as the Veblen effect, was first theorized in 1899 to explain the spending of money on and the acquiring of luxury commodities, goods and services, specifically as a public display of economic power of the buyer. To the conspicuous consumer, the public display of discretionary income is an economic means of either attaining or of maintaining a given social status.
The first theory that is relevant here is known as the Veblen effect, which comes from a book of the Theory of Leisure in 1899. At the time, the entire idea of consumption was based upon the imitation of the higher classes. The higher classes would take on something, it would become a status symbol. Because we had factories now to produce goods, it was easier to produce in mass, the cost would come down, so soon enough, the masses, the populace, could also access that status symbol. The moment that they did, it wasn't a status symbol anymore, and so the higher classes would start off with something else, and so on and so forth. Do you remember the monologue from The Devil Wears Prada?
You go to your closet and you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that that sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. And then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets. I think we need a jacket here. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. And then it filtered down through the department stores and then trickled on down into some tragic casual corner where you no doubt fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs. And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when, in fact, you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room. from a pile of stuff.
That's the Veblen effect. It's the idea that an object becomes the manifestation of power, and then whoever has that object sort of takes part of that power. That object becomes a metaphor for power. When you use it often enough and when it becomes ubiquitous enough, the object loses the connection to that power, but we still have the perception that it carries power. One of the greatest examples that I remember from my university days were the vestments of the Pope. The furs, the golden, the colors, the opulence. When that started during medieval times, even before that, it was a manifestation of indeed the power that the Pope had over people, and it was embodied by the vestments. Nowadays we still have the vestments, and unless you live in Italy, where the Vatican has a lot of influence on actual laws that we have, despite the fact that we should be a secular country, the Pope himself shouldn't have as much power over actual people, unless they are Catholics and they want to give up their freedom to believe him. That is the kind of thing that happens with the Veblen effect, where an object starts off bringing the metaphor of meaning of something, and then it's so ubiquitous and overused that it actually loses the connection to power, but is still perceived to have this power. This gets taken to 11 by that rightful son of a witch, no, he wishes, that was Bernays.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent, an idea that still persists today. It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
Bernays was the nephew of Freud and started to apply psychology to marketing and to make people want things that they don't need. One of his greatest achievements was to orchestrate the promotion of cigarettes to women as symbols of freedom. Smoking, of course, didn't make a woman any more or less free than she was before, but the way that he framed it made women perceive themselves as freer when they were smoking. The way that marketing now has evolved is that we have decentralized from mass media, which were like TV, papers, radio, to more individualized feeds, which are dependent on the algorithms. So technically, Instagram, Facebook, to whoever still uses it, TikTok, are mass media, but because they are curated through algorithms to what you specifically see, it's very rare that two feeds are ever the same. This gives an illusion that that is the world that exists, but because it's the world that you want to see. In this context, influencers do, awarely or not, a lot of the dirty work that before was given to the advertisement and the marketing of Bernays, where we tried to poke at the unconscious desires, which are much stronger than the conscious ones, to make people need things. It's something peculiar to me because I do not fall into the category of people that follow people for aspirational reasons, but I know that most people do. One of my dearest friends, who is actually doing a course in social media, told me very openly, oh no, I follow this and this person because my life is nothing like theirs, but seeing it through them and through their eyes and through what they share on Instagram makes me feel part of it. It becomes aspirational. When I can get something that they have, it makes me feel closer to that. And this is how we get into how cottagecore fits in this vision of capitalism that wants to make us buy stuff.
Your first mistake is buying shit from Shein. That's not cottagecore, it's wearing a cottagecore costume. Better off thrifting clothes or making/modifying clothes that you already own. Giving money to Shein is the least cottagecore thing that you could do. Besides, it's not going to last longer than a couple months anyway.
The environment is more important than your fashion sense. It's not very cottagecore to think, this stuff is bad, but I want to look cute and aesthetic, so I'm just going to keep wearing it.
I never said my fashion stuff is more important than the environment. I'm struggling for money at the moment, and I've tried to find stuff on other websites, but I can never find anything I can afford.
If you can't afford them, then don't get them. And don't settle for crappy fast fashion.
This post on Reddit, which has since been deleted but still has the comments, was basically someone showing a few screenshots from Shein of stuff like this, actually. That basically had a lot of mushrooms as very cottagecore feeling, which is very closely related to witchcore.
Witchcore is an aesthetic centered around the themes of modern witchcraft. It often involves magic, herbs, and gem collecting. It has some elements of cottagecore or naturecore, since some of the aesthetic revolves around the outdoor setting.
Core and aesthetics is an entirely different topic. If you don't know or would like to know more about aesthetics, I will send you to the videos of Mina Le. They are linked down in the description below as well. That is its own topic.
Aesthetics have now come to mean a collection of images, colors, objects, music, and writings that creates a specific emotion, purpose, and community.
Aesthetic is a feeling, a gathering of ideas, objects, pictures that gives you a certain cohesive feeling. In that context, when you acquire anything that is part of this aesthetic, you feel closer to the feeling, to the ideal, to the lifestyle that is connected to that aesthetic. Cottagecore and witchcore specifically, I mentioned in one of my previous videos, have this connection to the idea of slower living. What if I am the witch at the edge of town that lives off of the herbal remedies that she gives to the people of the village, lives off of the things that she cultivates in her garden? It's the ideal of getting out of the capitalist system to be self-sufficient in a slower living, more closely related to nature. I would argue that that has never actually existed in those terms, because I know very closely the life of farmers, basically, which were my grandparents. It was never that easy of a life. The thing about aesthetics is also the sanitation that comes with taking something that has one thing that is a good connotation, which is the getting out of the system in a way, getting independent. That's the thing. Farmers were all freelancers in a way, at least once they started to own their own land, which in the 18 and 1900s was absolutely the case. And then it gets sanitized of all the things that actually made it a very hard life, and you just remain with the feeling of having your hands, getting the eggs from them, without all the part that has to do with the cleaning that you have to do and the chicken shit. It's the romanticization of things that sanitizes them. And that becomes the aesthetic. And how do you access that lifestyle? As I mentioned before, I have the feeling, correct me if you think I'm wrong, that cottagecore, witchcore, and witchcraft in general became more popular during and after the pandemic, so in the last 4 years.
Cottagecore was a natural fit for a pandemic year. The subculture is all about pretending to live an idyllic life in the woods, and in 2020 was embraced as a sweet attempt to make the best of a bad situation.
That is because a lot of people, everybody really, was forced into lockdown. Wow, we should make a video just about lockdowns, because it's the first hint, the first suggestion that we had that the system as it exists doesn't have to exist that way. We were forced to be at home. We were forced to do things and partially even work from home. But suddenly everybody could work from home. Every job that was said, no, you need to be in the office to be controlled by management, basically. No. All of a sudden, all those adjustments were possible because they had to be possible. That is the part that actually governments want us to forget about the pandemic. They just want us to remember how horrible it was, rightfully, for all the lives lost.
Forgetting has been a core principle of the last 4 years of democratic strategy. This mass gaslighting, this huge project of denial and erasure, also has a cruel resonance with the cognitive impairment and damage done by the coronavirus itself, with brain fog, aphasia and attention deficit and short-term memory loss common effects of long COVID. Time is broken. No one has a good grasp on timelines and events. People joke consistently about not knowing how many years ago something happened. Historicity itself is being denuded. They want us to forget that during the lockdowns, global carbon emissions dropped 6%, that birdsong returned, that it was so obvious that the world was doing better. Nature is healing became a meme. They want us to forget that we overwhelmingly want to take care of one another, that we launched into projects of mutual aid, we thought carefully and lovingly about what we can do to support our neighbours. They don't want us to forget the alienation and unhappiness isolation produced, but they do want us to forget that we can cancel holiday travel and shopping and conferences and sports seasons, all the circuses of modern life, and that the world will still turn. They don't want us to remember that the Great Resignation, a mass wave of millions quitting in vocal and often organised protest, led to the largest secular gains in wages across the economy in decades. They want us to forget that we can live a life without commutes, restaurants, bars and offices, that we can just take care of each other. They want us to forget that stopping evictions is as simple as politicians making them illegal, but debt payments can be cancelled or halted just as easily, that all of the things that make up our economic and social domination are voluntary products of the collaboration of market and state.
They don't want us to remember that actually it showed us a glimpse of the fact that life could be different. Life could be adjusted enough to not have to live that way. But it's not convenient for mainly business landlords that own offices. Anyway, living under capitalism as a normal person that can go out and live according to capitalism rules and has frustration but no trouble in living 8 hours in an office, commuting home, commuting there, all those kind of things. If you can bend enough to capitalism, you make, hopefully, a living wage. Nowadays, it's getting more and more problematic. And again, remember when in 2021 we had the mass resignation because we understood that we deserve more? So when you live within capitalism that way and you make some kind of wage that gives you economic availability beyond rent, food and bills, you still don't have the time to get out of the system, have your cottage at the edge of town, making your herbal concoctions and all of that. You still want that. You had a glimpse, a taste of what it would feel like during lockdown, but the system doesn't want to change just because it showed you that it can. And so the next best thing for people become acquiring those objects that, along with their aesthetic, carry the value of the lifestyle that we wish we had, but we cannot access. The only thing that we can access economically is the object. So we buy cottagecore stuff. We buy wands as witches, we buy cauldrons, we are lost in this aesthetic of what things are supposed to look like, and when we have something that looks like that, it brings us a hint of pleasure, but not happiness. Why is that? Let's get into form, function, the importance of happiness and pleasure. We're going to get a bit technical here, but it should be easy enough to follow, and I have links and references downstairs. Form and function. Why isn't enough for you to just wear a t-shirt and a pair of jeans? In the Reddit post that started all of this, the person was literally told at some point,
the environment is more important than your fashion sense. It's not very cottagecore to think, this stuff is bad, but I want to look cute and aesthetic, so I'm just going to keep wearing it. If you can't afford them, then don't get them, and don't settle for crappy fast fashion.
And it's true, technically, legally, as long as you have a robe or a sack around you, you can go out in the world and not be charged for lewd acts being in the nude in public. So yeah, isn't function enough? There's a point about form, therefore beauty, the way that something is made and looks. That has to do with self-expression, which in an individualistic society, which is very much pushed by capitalism, is something that everybody is subject to.
Both subcultures and aesthetics have a shared list of elements, including a common fashion sense, media, and visual motifs. However, subcultures are noticeably different from the norm. You're able to pick out and identify a person from a subculture as being different from an average person. Aesthetics, by contrast, don't really have to be different from the norm. Subcultures tend to meet in person, have closer social ties, make zines, have memes, inside jokes, and more. In this regard, subcultures emphasize social connections when compared to internet aesthetics. On the other hand, one can participate in an aesthetic by just making mood boards, curating playlists, and posting fan-made edits and pictures. Aesthetics can be a complete mode for fantasy and escape. A cottagecore blogger can live in a studio apartment in New York City where only Navy business attire, listen to the music, make mood boards, and still be considered part of the community. In contrast, you have to actively participate in a subculture to be a part of it.
But there's also an intrinsic importance to the aesthetic of beauty. I mentioned it vaguely in my Venus video, but I'll link the full video down in the description below. There's a video that Kurzgesagt did on the importance of beauty on health. Since the dawn of man, we were making tools, we were making axes. Specifically, you think to go and hunt or cut down trees. Isn't that pure function? No. Technically, actually, through observation, they noted that no, to be just functional, it didn't need to be worked as much. The simple part of an axe, they worked him that way because it was more aesthetically pleasing. The symmetry was more pleasing. It required more work, and we're talking about cavemen here. They were still spending more time and more work to make something more aesthetically pleasing rather than just something functional. At that time, beauty has its importance. Here we are going into chemical brain responses. Beauty goes to poke at our reward system. The reward system is dopamine. Dopamine is there to make us look for something, and then we have another hit the moment that we find that something. Dopamine activates neuron and excites the neuron beside it. That way, it can lead to addiction. The simple reward itself can lead to addiction because it can be related to addictions to substances like alcohol, but when it's related to addictions like gambling, that is pure addiction to dopamine. Dopamine is pleasure. Dopamine is stuck in the moment. It's the reward now. It's not on long term, but it sedates you in the moment because getting full long-term happiness usually goes to poke at serotonin. There's a beautiful video that explains all of this. Go watch that. But my argument here is that the entire idea of a lifestyle that the cottagecore aesthetic suggests to us, of the slow living, of having nice, shabby chic things around us, of having this beautiful feeling that, again, is very much sanitized by all the unpleasant stuff that you would do if you lived in your own farm, that is what becomes the hope, becomes the ambition, the aspiration. The aspiration is happiness, is living in that state contented, and every day is like that, and it's a good thing. Happiness is rare in our world because our world, provoked and pushed forward by capitalism and especially by the digital era of Web 2.0, so by social media, we are in a world that understands the importance of keep giving us small doses of dopamine because indeed it creates an addiction. More importantly, and you can see that with apps indeed like TikTok, we started to see it on Facebook with the notification, but this TikTok is another story. We live in the quick reward society that indeed started off with apps. Apps keep us hooked and distracted with the small reward, and then they can become addiction with stuff like microtransactions at times. And it is in the interest of the capitalist system to keep us hooked and sedated in our search of immediate pleasure, because if we are not hooked all the time, we would take time off. Taking time off from the constant dopamine telling us, get this now, is actually what you do in meditation, by the way, stopping the dopamine from exciting your neurons. We'll make a video about that soon. But if we had the time to stop and not be constantly excited by the dopamine and understand what's the plan that we need to get to what is happiness for us, we would have a chance to approach the situation holistically. What do I need to do in my daily life? What do I need to do in my work life? How does this connect to my family? When you start to be able to plan and organize on the long term, on sides that include every side of your life, you can actually make yourself happy, bring yourself to contentment. You would have the ability to organize. And after you organize for your own happiness, what else can you organize for? Organization takes time and collaboration. When you organize with people that understand this system doesn't work like this, we need to change it, organization can be useful, but organization takes time. And if you don't have the time, because you have to just look for the next hit of dopamine rather than a long-term plan, the system doesn't have to work about uprising. That being said, let's go back to Shein, the crux of our hatred.
What is the problem, you may ask?
Capitalism.
So I feel like there's a lot of articles and videos on the internet talking about the crimes of fast fashion. Yes, it's environmentally damaging. Yes, it's very unethical because workers are working in Victorian era factory conditions. And a lot of the time, these companies steal ideas and designs. But I also want to add a disclaimer that I am not going to take a dump. I'm not taking a dump on people who shop fast fashion unless you're rich and doing it.
How can you buy cottagecore from Shein that it's the antithesis of anything that the lifestyle of cottagecore tries to bring you to? The slow living, the quality of life. How can you have slow living in your forest if Shein destroys the environment? Shein does that. It's not whataboutism, but others do that.
Also remember, clothes from well-known fashion brands and that are more expensive not necessarily means good quality or ethically made too. Just stop over-consuming clothes and be mindful with what we wear. Don't follow fashion trends, they just want you to spend.
Example. In the UK, we have a chain store called Primark. It is no mystery that Primark is for broke, poor people, because you can get clothes as cheap as you get them on Shein. Arguably, Primark is worse in terms of environment and especially in terms of modern slavery. No one in the UK would dream of tell broke people that need Primark to survive, or otherwise literally their clothes fall to the floor and then they go around naked, that they need not to buy from Primark. Especially in the midst of a cost of living crisis that at this point has lasted for 2-3 years, I think. It's just a natural state of things now here. Why is the flack on Shein? I'd argue that is for 2 reasons. One, indeed, is the way that Chinese manufacturers in general have no qualms with copyright law. They have just decided that it's not important. That is an issue to a degree, but I would argue that the entire state of copyright law is currently an issue, and it would need an entire rehauling. There's a video about that. I will find it. I will put it down in the description below just to talk about that. It is indeed an issue when we steal a design from a small artist. But as we mentioned before, that is basically what big corporations have been doing all this time. That's how the high street was destroyed. And we don't blink too much of an eye to it. I am all for this is wrong, but the system is wrong, not one of the examples that we pick. In today's culture and society also, there's no one apart from a corporation that can actually uphold in a court of law a copyright suit, because no independent artist can afford it against a corporation. Shein, Zara, they all have mountains of lawyers, the Etsy independent artists have the Etsy returns. And I have a feeling that we pick one example for, again, one is the excuse of copyright. Many do that. The second is pure and simple racism. H&M, Zara, New Look, plenty of modern fashion labels do exactly the same. With the reach that they have and the understanding of the morals market that we have put on Western society, they can also afford to do their clean labels, their sustainable labels, their kind labels. The simple fact that H&M has a sustainable label means that everything else is not sustainable. We are okay with it because it's a Swedish company. That's a bit racist to me, but by all means, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, the person that did the original post on Reddit was given, other than just being shut upon, 2 suggestions.
Better off thrifting clothes or making/modifying clothes that you already own.
1. Go thrift, so go to charity shops, find old granny clothes, which were an amazing thing about 10 years ago when we were all into hipster stuff. Wear what your granny would have worn, perfect. But also, well, why don't you just learn and sew yourself? It's part of the cottagecore ideal to sew, mend, do crochet, knit. If you are thinking that, and you're right now thinking, yeah, no, that's absolutely right and fair, I'd argue that it's worth going into classism not only for matters of money, and so a person has less money and less economic availability to buy a proper pricey thing, so go thrift or go make it yourself. The fabric is going to cost less anyway. And to that, I have to say, do you have any idea of the time that it takes to develop a skill like sewing, or to just go and jump from one charity shop to the other, hoping to find not only your size, but also the style that you're looking for? Because fucking hell if that's time privilege, and having that time means that you are safe enough economically to just have that time to do that thing. Classism is insidious. It's not just about money. It's about all those things. Have you ever watched In Time? That explains like nothing else how time is money and the other way around. How can you tell the disabled person that lives on welfare or the mom that goes to 3 jobs, no, wear a t-shirt and jeans, because it doesn't matter that something that looks cute on you makes you feel better despite the shit life that you have. It's not good for the environment, and beggars can't be choosers. The beggars can't be choosers mentality is the best possible way that corporations found to pit us against each other as people. I would argue that the entire campaign against Shein, which is horrible by the way, is just been very well marketed and probably paid for by all those other companies that do exactly the same, but are more wrapped into Western appearance of morals, like Zara, like H&M, because they need a scapegoat. They do exactly the same. They just know better how to market themselves. And they feed into our need to be morally superior.
The development of Veblen's sociology of conspicuous consumption also identified and described other economic behaviours such as individuous consumption, which is the ostentatious consumption of goods, an action meant to provoke the envy of other people, and conspicuous compassion, the ostentatious use of charity meant to enhance the reputation and social prestige of the donor.
That is still something that we carry along from Puritanism and the entire way that white American society, which culturally has influenced the rest of the world for the last at least 200-300 years, that has become intrinsic to value, even for people that are not actually Christians or Puritans. I mentioned it very vaguely. I genuinely do invite you to read the entire book, Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price, PhD. Because as much as I mentioned it for the sloth scene in the 7 Deadly Sins through a feminist lens, that goes to explain how puritanical values about hard work and not expecting a reward in this world were actually things told to people, especially slaves in the US, to keep them working hard while getting nothing. And this idea of morality, you at least get moral superiority to someone, it's something that we fall prey very, very easily. And that's why we say beggars can't be choosers. If you can't afford a handmade apron dress embroidered by the artists themselves that is going to cost you $200, then don't you dare going to buy the $20 version on Shein. You do not deserve to look in the mirror and be pleased by that. Without considering and discounting completely all the marginalization that a person already needs to have to go and decide to buy from Shein or not at all. Because this was the entire point of this post. Like, this person didn't have the time to learn how to sew and to go thrift, which means they were working. They had that time invested somewhere else. And they didn't have the money to spend $200. Either they spend the $20 on Shein or they're not going to buy it at all and wear a t-shirt and jeans. Do you genuinely want to put the moral stance on people that come from this trouble already because one thing will make them look nicer in the mirror according to their own ideal and will make them feel better for 5 minutes? I am not condoning what Shein does, but I think that moving the responsibility on the people that buy from it because they wouldn't have another choice to buy for more anyway is how corporations keep us divided, is how we take the satisfaction in the moment, the dopamine hit of feeling superior because we don't buy from Shein. I save enough to buy from the artist. That is dopamine addiction that keeps you from organizing for a longer term solution. On the point of poverty also, I need to highlight this. We have this belief, truly, poor people are poor by choice. They're lazy, they don't want to work, they have given into addiction, if I were to open that can of worms. And as someone that has been at risk of homelessness twice in their life, I can tell you, you are much closer, you are one turn of luck away from the homeless person that you try to ignore in the street than from the billionaires that you are supporting the tax cuts of, with the idea and hope that one day you'll join them. No, statistically, you'll get homeless before you get a billionaire.
Temporarily embarrassed millionaire. A poor person who advocates against social welfare programs because they believe they will become rich in the future.
But capitalism needs poverty to exist. We have seen, I've mentioned it before, we have done studies. Housing first, like the Nordic countries have done, shows that it costs us less to end homelessness than to find people that have tents around, because when then they are unwell and services need to be called, you need to call the police to undo their encampments once in a while. That costs us more than just giving all of them a house and then we work on bringing them back into the world, bringing them back into work, all of that. Not that cost efficiency should be the motive, but since governments talk about we don't have the money for this, it costs us less to end homelessness. We choose not to. Why? Because you need to keep scared and keep your head down and work like a little worker ant, your 8 hours in an office, in a shop, that keeps capitalism going. The 1 or 2 people that get a success story, those are the ones that are the carrot dangled in your face. See, if you work hard, you can do it too. It's the hard work fallacy. There's a lot that we don't have as information to understand what privileges usually they had to get there or what luck they simply had. But those are the carrot dangled in front of you. Once I was doing food hauls, long time ago. In my food haul, I showed that I got free-range eggs. At the time, free-range eggs costed 13 pence per egg. Because I was very aware of how the cost of living crisis was already impacting the UK, I made a point. I got these, but you can get eggs for as low as 8p per egg. Those are caged, but studies have been done actually. The amount of vitamin D is pretty much the same when you buy them from a supermarket, whether it's free range or caged. So if you can't afford a free range, no moral issue there, go for the caged one. And I got a comment telling me, oh, in this day and age, it's absolutely unreasonable to be so cruel to buy caged eggs. It's impossible that you can't afford the free-range eggs. If anything, eat less eggs. Poor people, stop being poor and stop eating, and you'll not be as poor. And that is the moral superiority that I'm talking about. It could apply to veganism, we don't go there. It doesn't apply to every vegan person, but when we go into emissions, it kind of goes there. Another story for another time. This is about capitalism, so I don't want to bring too much socialist theory in it. But there's one important thing that I think Karl Marx said that applies to this, and it had to do with religion. Sounds weird, doesn't it? Give me a second. Marx said that religion was the opiate of society. It kept them easily controlled, it gave them morals to follow without reason, really. It kept them easy to rule for the people in power, and it didn't leave them with enough time to wonder how to solve the real problems around them, because when it was a matter of you do that, you're going to go to hell, there wasn't much reasoning that you could do. It's actually something that we mentioned in the 7 Deadly Sins, like religion existed to give these moral rules to make sure that people would stay in line without actual reason to stay in line. And I think it's very interesting that Christians also, especially in America nowadays, especially the cultist ones, wrap themselves in this morality of being Christians, while really it's very, very common that atheist people, pagan people, have morality, the sense of right and wrong, just based upon decency. Religion doesn't need to be there to be decent. And at the same time, people that are religious and go to Mass sometimes think that they can do anything and everything because they will go to confess. Keep that in mind for a second, please. There are people that argue that nowadays consumerism is the new opiate of the masses, because indeed the kind of return of dopamine that it gives you to have this shiny new pretty thing for a second keeps you distracted and then keeps you wanting for more. More in the short term enough that you don't have time to disconnect from the wheel and organize for the long term. There's also one point to say about dopamine. Again, I recommend you watch the video on serotonin and dopamine, but one thing to say about the addiction of getting things or any kind of other addiction that depends on dopamine is the point of tolerance. Because dopamine excites the neurons, it builds up tolerance, which means you have to do more to get less return of satisfaction. So when you start being, a shopaholic, in time you will have to increase because that level of excitement of the neurons will give you a less return of satisfaction and dopamine. In real time it's the same amount, but your brain got used to it, and so it needs a harder hit to feel it as much. So it actually is unhealthy for you, by the way. And that's why you hear so much about dopamine detox, which, by the way, is what meditation does. Because capitalism not only consumes itself and also consumes the criticism that you make of it, it gives at this point the delusion, the moral delusion, that if you're doing better, if you are economically more stable of someone, you are indeed more morally valuable. So you can tell people off if they buy from Shein without understanding or thinking about the implication of buying something like that, the limitations that they have compared to you if they buy something like that. In this context, and I need to make this note just for personal return, I think that neurodivergent people are the bane of the existence of capitalism. This might be why we are absolutely not valuable in the capitalist system. And it is because everybody else, they have figured out the fact that PR comes from psychology and from a certain set of patterns in people works for neurotypical people, for allistic people. it doesn't necessarily work for us, and it doesn't make us good consumers because of that. Because those kind of tricks don't necessarily work for us. Again, the aspirational feed does nothing for me. This is probably the reason why I can't be an influencer, because that idea of keeping an aesthetic true, I don't even understand where to start. I post what I like personally, not something that needs to be staged to look in a certain way. And indeed, if you look at the history of man, we are less than 1% time-wise, the Homo sapiens sapiens. Neurodivergent people have always existed. There is an argument that suggests neurodivergent people needed to exist in times of prehistory because we were the innovators, because our brain patterns don't work the way as others do. We used to be the people that would break off from a tribe to go and explore, to move forward. We do not live necessarily well in the patterns that are given to neurotypical people. In history, that was a useful trait. In capitalism, we can't be figured out, and so we are vilified for that. The bottom line here is, I hope you got an understanding of where cottagecore, Shein, super fast fashion come from, and why the system is the issue, not the poor person that goes to buy from them. Would I advise anyone to go and buy from Shein? No. Would I make people aware that Shein steals designs? Yes. However, do take into consideration the Veblen effect in this. But would I still ostracize people that buy from Shein, despite the fact that they have limited choices because they are low in the system of capitalism enough that that is all the economic availability that they have? Do I want to tell them, I morally judge them if they get a cottagecore dress from Shein, then again, they put on at the end of the day, after having no money left from their welfare, or after having worked 3 jobs, because that makes them look in the mirror and feel better, and they shouldn't because it's morally wrong? Fuck no. I hope this very quick, extremely too quick, adventure through capitalism and the way that it tries to convince us to uphold it for corporations makes things a little bit more understandable on a wider scale, so that again, when you see someone wearing something from Shein, this is Romeo, by the way, and you want to tell them, no, you shouldn't look cute for the sake of environmentalism, for the sake of all the bad things that a corporation does, I would argue not only that your H&M or Zara do the same thing, but they are better at marketing, but that yes, the individual you feel morally superior to is not the issue. The system is the issue. If we bring back governmental regulations that neoliberalism has destroyed, these businesses would not exist in the first place, which means other solutions would need to be found to bring form and function together for the benefit of all. Until the system, the neoliberalist system, is taken down, do not take it against the poor person. You are on the same side of the barricade, no matter how longingly you can look at Kim Kardashian or Elon Musk. And if you're doing that to Elon Musk, you shouldn't be here. And until the next video, I hope that we can hex the patriarchy together. Because fuck me if there's need for it.